I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Throws up with the head. Intercepted. 30. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25, 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
It is the first division battle for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFC South, and it's on prime time. Thursday Night Football has returned as the 3-1 Buccaneers will travel to Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and take on the 2-2 Atlanta Falcons. Welcome back to this week's game preview edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast. I am your host, as always, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. Joining us on the show today, a returning guest. We talked to him last year as the Buccaneers were getting ready to face Atlanta, and he is making his return. Friend of the pod, host and contributor for the Falcoholic, Kevin Knight, is back on the show. Kevin, pleasure to have you back, my friend.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was wondering if we would be able to make it work on a short week. I'm glad we got it done. So happy to be back, guys.
Absolutely. And again, you mentioned it's a short week, but a very important game for both of these teams. The NFC South coming out a little bit hotter than I think a lot of people expected here in the 2024 season. And things are competitive, but the Bucs with a win would look to go to 4-1, create a little bit of distance between them and the rest of these teams in the division, and they would have sole possession of first place in the NFC South. Now, if the Falcons win, both of these teams move to 3-2. Atlanta takes over first place with the tiebreaker and a victory over Tampa Bay. So we can get into some injury news here in a minute, but overall, Kevin, I wanted to get your thoughts on how the Falcons shape up in this one, because it's been a lot of highs and lows in this season so far, and we're just a quarter into the thing.
Yeah, the Falcons are a very, I would say they're a very average team right now. The context is that Atlanta's played, depending on some metrics, the number 1 hardest schedule, some metrics number 3, whatever what have you. So the fact that they, I think most of us that weren't complete homers, we're expecting like 2-2 as like a good scenario out of this start. I think getting the win over the Eagles was not expected. I think most people thought we would beat the Steelers, and the Steelers have obviously been better than expected too. So, the Bucs also got a win against the Eagles. It's just the Saints that lost out on the beating the Eagles party. So we'll see what the Panthers do. But yeah, Atlanta, this is definitely a team that you could tell like they changed a lot this offseason. They changed their whole offensive coaching staff, except for their offensive line coach. They have 2 new quarterbacks, a lot of new pieces on offense. The offense itself is very much like a work in progress. You can tell everyone's still getting their feet wet. The defense has definitely been bend but don't break, but they've been effective at limiting their opponents. They're about league average in terms of points allowed. They've allowed some yardage, but they've just been kind of making key plays, turnovers, and big stops, and doing what they need to do to make sure the offense has a chance. The offense just hasn't really pulled its weight pretty much any games. The Falcons are getting dominated in time of possession in every single game they play because they're really bad on third down. So that's not something that can continue, obviously, but very up and down start, but it's a bunch of new pieces and a really rough opening. So I think right now we're sort of looking at this game as what's like, this is starting the second quarter of the season. So now we need to see like, okay, is this team going to improve to being better than average, or are we going to be mired in this kind of, oh, what the heck is going on? Like, are we good or not sort of area for the next month? This is a big game, obviously, for both teams.
What are your overall thoughts on Kirk Cousins so far this year? Because when the Falcons made that signing, a lot of people said, hey, this is a team that has an underrated roster. They can make a couple more moves here in the offseason and really be ready to compete for this division. And I know we kind of talked about, quarterback, new team, new system, building cohesion. It's a work in progress. We saw it happen with the Buccaneers in 2023. Got a free agent quarterback in Baker Mayfield. Takes like 7, 8, 9 weeks for things to be functioning the way that they should. But through the first 4 games, do you think Kirk Cousins could potentially be the guy that franchise wants him to be? Can he take that team to the next level and consistently play well enough to do it?
I mean, Cousins hasn't really been the problem. It's been an odd start for this offense. I mean, I don't know if you guys watched the week 1 game against the Steelers. The Falcons came out running 100% shotgun and pistol. They ran 0 play action snaps. And the offense just looked weird. And we were like, oh my God, is Kirk like that hurt that he can't even execute play action or play under center? Apparently not. Apparently that's not the case. They just rolled out that game plan for some reason, because the next week and every other week, the offense has looked nothing like that. It was one of the more bizarre week 1 game plans I've ever seen in my life. So if you throw that out, once they started putting Kirk Cousins where he's comfortable, which is under center and running play action, he looks fine. I think most of it is still recovering from the Achilles. Kirk was never super mobile to begin with. He's still hesitant, like moving off of that leg. He can't drive the ball to the sideline or super deep at full capacity yet. It's getting better every week. Last week, we saw him really try to take a bunch of deep shots that were the distance wasn't the issue. In fact, he was actually overthrowing most of the time. So I think it's getting better every week and he's trusting it more, but it's all like, it's all stuff that you feel like can get better. What Cousins has done well, which Ritter never did, was that he can get through his progressions and he's generally going to throw the ball to the right man and not throw it to the defense. He has thrown a couple picks here and there. Week 1 was obviously pretty bad with that. After that, it's been a lot better. But really the issue is he's still not really seeing the whole field and not getting through all the progressions. It's better than it was last year, which is extremely low bar. But, you know, you can see the progress. And like last week against the Saints and against the Chiefs too, like the Falcons kind of have gotten the short end of the stick on some officiating. You know, Kyle Pitts in the end zone should have had 4 opportunities from the 1. They don't get it, end up losing that game against the Chiefs. And then against the Saints, great screen to Bijan, taken off the board by one of the weakest holding calls you'll ever see. So like the offense, I think, looks worse than it is, but they're a little bit disjointed. They're a little bit off schedule. They've had some drops. They've had some, you know, mistakes early. They've got obviously a new center in the lineup because Drew Dahlman's on IR. They've got a new right tackle in the lineup because Caleb McGarry's still recovering. And those guys haven't played terribly, but like last week against the Saints, 2 snap infractions in critical moments by the new center. And, you know, that obviously killed 2 drives. So Kirk Cousins, I think, is not an issue. This is kind of what I was expecting from a guy coming off an Achilles tear in a new offense. But now it's time for October Kirk. You know, you look back at Kirk's career, September is his worst month. He typically starts slow. In October, he has, I believe he has twice as many wins as losses through his career. So we're hoping October Kirk is going to arrive and help usher this offense into, you know, better than 25th in the league or whatever the heck they are right now.
Couple of primetime game-winning drives for Kirk Cousins, which obviously begs the question, what kind of Kirk Cousins we're going to see Thursday night against the Bucs. Evan, before we dive into the injuries here, your thoughts on what Atlanta brings to the table?
Obviously, you know, looking at it, and, you know, Kevin mentioned it about the new offense, right? And it takes time, right? I mean, it's only, we're 4 games into this season, right? And I know it feels like a lot of football has been played, but there's so much more to be played. And, you know, you're brand new system. I mean, it's not just the brand new system. It's a brand new city. It's a brand new team. It's brand new teammates. It's everything. And, you know, that can take some adjusting, even for a veteran quarterback like Kirk Cousins. That doesn't happen overnight. So I would expect, you know, I think the Buccaneers are maybe getting the Falcons at the right time, right? I think, you know, playing them earlier in the season would be better than playing them later in the season, where maybe Kirk Cousins is a little more familiar in the offense. If he does, you know, end up, as the year goes on, he gets more healthier, can drive the ball a bit more. Like Kevin said, he's never been the most mobile guy, but he can, it's not like he's a statue back there. He can move in and out of the pocket a little bit. The more time goes on, that might improve. So the Buccaneers getting them earlier in the season might be a more of an advantage for the Buccaneers. But look, I mean, yeah, we've seen this Bucs team, you know, come off of a big victory in Detroit and then lay an egg against Denver. So it's going to come down to what Bucs team shows up. And on a short week, it's always difficult to sort of tell, right? And I think obviously they have the disadvantage because they have to travel. But, you know, when looking at this Falcons team, I mean, Kyle Pitts has been pretty disappointing this year. It seems like the book is about to be written on him pretty much. Where it's been a disappointing career, for Kyle Pitts so far. Bijan Robinson's still a heck of a football player, so that's something the Buccaneers are going to have to look out for. I am interested to see about the offensive line, though, of the Falcons and how this Buccaneers defensive line handles it, because the Bucs defensive line last week feasted on the Eagles, and that was not something we're used to, right? They had 2 sacks coming into that game, had 6 sacks that day. I'm not expecting 6 sacks. I think that's a little, with this pass rush, I think that's a little bit much. But I am curious to see if they can get consistent pressure on Kirk Cousins, a guy who isn't going to be able to scramble even like a Jalen Hurts can or like a Bo Nix can, get out of that pressure. So I am curious to see if they can do that. If they can, I think it's a huge advantage of the Bucs. But if they can let Kirk Cousins sit back and just pick them apart, we saw what happened in that final drive against Philly, with Kirk Cousins. Yeah. The Eagles pass rush could not lay a finger on him, and Kirk Cousins went down the field immediately. The Eagles were playing soft coverage, and it was an easy touchdown drive. So that's something the Buccaneers are going to have to look out for. And I think the trench battle on both sides of the football is going to go a long way, as it does. Admittedly, it does most of the weeks in the NFL. But I think in this one in particular, the trench battle is going to go a long way in determining who wins this game.
Yeah, absolutely. We already mentioned that Atlanta playing with a backup center here. I think the return of Vita Vea is going to go a long way for the production of this pass rush. I mean, let's face it. Did the Bucs get 6 sacks solely because of Vita Vea being out there? No. But it certainly helps, right? I mean, I think it was 2 sacks over the first 3 games for Tampa Bay. So any reinforcements they can get along that defensive line, the better. As I think it's a perfect time to talk about some of these injuries for Tampa Bay. The Bucs are 3-1. They've been playing some good ball, but they have not been doing it healthy. Todd Bowles confirmed today that the Bucs will once again be without safety Antoine Winfield Jr. They will be without defensive lineman Kalijah Kancey. They will go once again without right tackle Luke Gedeke, who I Bleav is now missing his 3rd game with a concussion.
Off a concussion, right?
Yeah, has not cleared concussion protocol. Practiced with the team last week, was limited participation, got bumped up to full participation, but could not clear those concussion symptoms. Trey Palmer, who scored a touchdown last week against the Eagles, is out with a concussion. Short week for him. Really wasn't expected to turn around and make this one. But regardless, the Bucs going to be shorthanded in that wide receiver room because on top of Trey Palmer being out, the hamstring injury for Jalen McMillan was bothering him still. He will not play. So the Buccaneers signed Sterling Shepard to the active roster from the practice squad this season. He played great last week. His first active game on the roster, 50 snaps for the veteran wide receiver. It's going to be interesting to see how he does in a wide receiver 3 role. And then to wrap it up here, the list for Tampa Bay, I Bleav no linebacker Servassier Dennis. So Evan, Bucs should expect a they should expect a heavy bit of KJ Britt here at the linebacker position, which for the Falcons could be something for them to take advantage of.
Yeah, and it's Servassier Dennis. I Bleav the Bucs actually put him on IR, so he's out at least 4 games here. Sounds like it could be, even more than the 4 games. It's tough on a short week, right? I think, and Bowles, I think, had even alluded to it that if the game had been Sunday, I think he said Kancey may have had a much better chance to play had the game been Sunday. But on a short week, you're missing critical recovery time, right? And it sounds like Winfield probably wouldn't have been able to. And as far as Trey Palmer, the concussion protocol thing, right? It's kind of out of the Buccaneers' hands. And like I said, concussions are weird because it's basically like, if you don't have a concussion, it's okay. When do you wake up without concussion symptoms, right? It's like whenever that happens, like you can't really predict that. So the thing about Gedeke, I think he's another one where maybe if the game was on Sunday, maybe has more time to pass through the concussion protocol. We will see, if the Buccaneers will be able to get, at least 2 of those guys back for New Orleans, after this mini bye week here, playing on Thursday night, you have New Orleans next week, but we'll see. I would expect maybe at least one of them to be able to. But yeah, I mean, look, the injuries and McMillan getting hurt late last week, right? With a hamstring. Hamstrings can be tricky as well. Didn't expect him to be available available, right? And I think it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to be available once the Buccaneers signed Sterling Shepard to their active roster. Shepard played well last week, but you're going to need to do it again because he's going to be basically in that wide receiver 3 role for the Buccaneers. It's interesting because the Baker and Sterling Shepard connection really, they haven't. They said, "Oh, it's a reunion and stuff." Yeah, but they haven't played together since college, right? It's not like they were playing together this whole time, in New York or whatever. And they looked pretty good on Sunday. So the Buccaneers are going to need that. Another thing, though, with Luke Gedeke being out, is a lot of people say, "Oh, this offensive line," or like, honestly, even in the Denver game. Justin School's been relatively fine.
I think...
even in the go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think for Justin School, it's been nothing but, he started terribly week 2 against Aiden Hutchinson, so really there was no place for him to go but up after that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm not saying he's been spectacular, right? But he's been for a backup right tackle, he's been fine, right? And I think Cody Mauch is actually a bigger concern for me than Justin School right now. But Mauch played fine last week too. So
had a better game.
This offensive line is gonna need to protect Baker Mayfield, right? They are gonna need to protect Baker Mayfield, and they're gonna need to give him time. This Falcons defense can be stingy, or just like Kevin said, it's a bend don't break thing. A lot similar to the Buccaneers, right? The Buccaneers defense, especially in that Detroit game, the definition of bend but don't break. So it's going to need to be 7 points instead of 3, right? And I think the offensive line being able to, one, protect Mayfield, but also improve that run game, right? The run game looked decent last week. The Buccaneers didn't run it a ton last week, but I think controlling the clock, as Kevin said, the Falcons' time of possession's been not so great this year, largely because of the Falcons' offense. I think keeping that defense on the field, keeping them, it's in a dome, so you're not dealing with the heat like you were last week in Tampa. But I think keeping that defense on the field, controlling the chains, moving the chains, and basically having 3rd and shorts, I think is critical too. Staying out of 3rd and longs, and I think that would help everybody. It helps an entire offense. So Gedeke being out, it does suck, but I don't think it's the end of the world. And a lot of people now, one last note, are critical, on Cansey, right? And I just think it's the product of being the short week. And I get people are frustrated because he hasn't played in the game yet this season. But I think it's more so just the fact that this game is on Thursday. I think if he was on Sunday, it'd be a much better chance of playing. If he can't go next week, then we have an issue, right? And then it's an issue of, well, why didn't you put him on IR and this and that? So hopefully Canty can make his season debut next week in New Orleans. But for now, the Buccaneers with, like you mentioned, right, the addition now of Vita Vea returning will certainly help that interior. But he's going to have another good game this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Kalijah Cansey going to be a big piece of that defensive line when he returns. J.C. Allen reported last week before Philly that he was expected back. And just like you said, I think if this game was not on Thursday and he had those extra 4 days to get ready to go, he could try and give it a go. But I guess if we got to look at silver lining here, he's not available against Atlanta. He gets an extra 10 days of rest to get ready for the following Sunday, so he will be that much better. For the people asking, expect him back by then. I think that is the official timetable that has been set. Some Cannon Fire crew in the chat very quickly. Second and Fun said, regarding Luke Gedeke at right tackle, concussion symptoms can last up to 3 months and in some cases up to a year. Everyone acting like he should have been back weeks ago just because, quote, it's a concussion, have to learn more about it, which is a very true statement. You don't really think about things happening like that just because of how procedural the concussion injury has become in the NFL. But Evan, you talked about it. A lot of these guys wind up on the concussion protocol, not because they have an actual concussion, just because they are showing these symptoms. It's a thing that happens with football. It's just part of the game. But really quickly, I want to wrap up injuries. We're taking a lot of time here talking about the injury report.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It's really just all the Bucs. The Bucs are tore up. They've been playing well, but again, they have to get healthy. But taking a look at Atlanta, Kevin, they come into this relatively in good shape when you compare them to Tampa. We just talked about the offensive linemen that are out, the center being placed on injured reserve. You're missing your right tackle, Caleb McCreary. And then I believe Troy Anderson at linebacker, probably the biggest loss of the week because he had damn near 20 tackles last week.
Yeah. Big breakout game for Troy. That was, he was drafted back in 2022 as their second round pick with a lot of hype. Obviously, people know his story. He was a former quarterback and running back at Montana State, only played linebacker for, handful of games. So he was always a slow burner, ends up missing all of 2023 with an injury. So he's only last week was his 10th start. Finally has that breakout game, gets the pick 6 on Derek Carr that was obviously critical to that win. And it seemed like after he got that pick 6, he just was like, okay, I'm good now. I know how to play linebacker in the NFL, and just turned it on. And the hesitation that we'd been seeing from him kind of went away. So yeah, I mean, he ends up getting hurt on special teams at the end of the game, which the Falcons only had 3 healthy linebackers in this game, and they were playing him on special teams. That is completely foolish coaching. So I can't believe that that's how we're going to lose him for this game, is they're playing him on special teams in the fourth quarter. But yeah, he has not practiced. It is a day-to-day thing. It's a pain management thing. I don't know exactly what the injury is, but I wouldn't expect him to play on the short week. So they do have rookie linebacker J.D. Bertrand who will step up. They also brought back Rashaan Evans, who is familiar with this defense. And the coaching staff, he'll probably be activated to be a depth guy. The Falcons are also missing Nate Landman, who's their best run defender. He's going to be on IR for this game, could come back next week. But yeah, like you said, really the Anderson injury, looms large over this because they're very thin at linebacker. The other injuries, obviously Drew Dahlman's on IR, so Ryan Newsell's in at center. Caleb McGarry has been practicing since late last week. McGarry practiced last Friday, and then he's practiced all this week in a limited fashion. It's possible he could be back. He was described as day-to-day after his injury, so he could come back. I don't know that they need to rush him back if he's not ready. It depends on the game plan. It's weird because the guys that the Falcons lost, Drew Dahlman and Caleb McGarry, they're great run defenders, like run blockers, the 2 best run blockers on the team, but they're like very average pass protectors. So actually the pass protection didn't really take a step back with the replacements. So if they're going to go with a pass heavy game script against the Bucs, not really a need to rush McGarry back, but the run game definitely takes a hit without him in there. So we'll see how that develops. I mean, even if they want to activate him as the backup just in case, but they're going to let Storm play it out, and see if they need him. That would be nice to have that extra depth. But yeah, I don't think any of the other guys on this list, like Bijan, has been getting some rest, getting some limited practices. I don't really think there's anything concerning there in terms of his availability. And same thing with Ray McLeod. I don't think there hasn't sounded like there's been any concerns about their availability for the game. So it's really just Anderson, I think, would be the guy to watch in terms of whether he'll be able to suit up or not.
One of the storylines that we've been paying close attention to coming into this game, and I'm going to be honest with you, I feel like maybe I just haven't heard as many people talk about this. A lot of people want to look at this matchup on paper and say, the Bucs are the better team. They're going to win by 10. One, it's a division game. You can't ever overlook an opponent. I mean, you can't overlook any opponent because look at what the Broncos did to the Bucs, but you can't overlook an NFC South opponent. But on top of that, the Buccaneers have made some changes to their coaching staff since the last time these two teams played. And I think some of the connections here are very interesting when you talk about what teams are going to be expecting and how the Falcons are going to be game planning for a Todd Bowles defense and especially a Liam Cohen offense. So we know that head coach Raheem Morris for Atlanta used to be the head coach for Tampa Bay back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. He was let go, bounced around as a coordinator in the NFL. Spent a couple of years with the LA Rams as their defensive coordinator, coaching under Sean McVay. Eventually gets the Falcons job. Liam Cohen, the Buccaneers' new offensive coordinator, was the offensive coordinator in LA for a year across from Raheem Morris. So for an entire season under Sean McVay with the Rams, Liam Cohen and Raheem Morris basically worked together, faced off against each other in practice every day, in training camp, preseason, throughout the season, always trying to find ways to get better against their collective system. So there's a lot of experience here. And let's also make sure we mention the offensive coordinator for Atlanta, Zach Robinson, was on LA's coaching staff with Liam Cohen as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of connections all around that tie these guys back to Sean McVay in LA. So I guess, basically we have to find out how good Sean McVay's information is so many years later. But there's a lot of connections here, specifically all of these guys' time with the Rams. Evan, your thoughts on how that factors into, I guess, how creative Liam Cohen is going to have to get, because he had a really good response against Philly after laying an egg against Denver. Just was not a good offensive game plan. He got things back on the right track, but I mean, this is a coach who may or may not have a little more homework than the next guy when trying to game plan for Liam Cohen here.
Yeah, there is a lot of familiarity there, right? And that can play obviously to either one, right? Because at the same time, okay, so Raheem Morris knows Liam Cohen. Liam Cohen knows Raheem Morris, right? So it kind of goes both ways there, where both guys maybe know some tendencies, right? Especially a lot of times, during training camp, right? It's, one coordinator's on one side with a walkie-talkie, the other coordinator's on the other side with a walkie-talkie, right? So breaking down film, whatever it may be, I'm sure. And look, I mean, the personnel has a lot to do with it, right? The personnel of the Falcons defense is not the same as the Rams defense. The personnel of the Bucs offense is not the same as the personnel of the Rams offense. That matters. That familiarity there, I think, will matter. And we honestly don't know who the advantage is to, though, right? Because just like I mentioned, they both know each other. The Zach Robinson thing is interesting. Because they did work together on the same side of the football, right? They maybe do share a lot of ideas with each other, right? About how to get better when you're with the Rams, of do this or do that. And I'm sure there's some things when watching the tape. I'm sure Raheem Morris has asked Zach Robinson. I'm sure they've had a conversation at some point this week about what Liam Cohen likes to do. I'm sure Todd Bowles has asked Liam Cohen what Zach Robinson likes to do as an offensive coordinator. So it'll be interesting to see that chess match, right? And I think it's a big key in this game of, what type of game plan are both sides going to be putting in. Liam Cohen, like you said, had a big bounce back, right? I mean, look, the players didn't execute against Denver, but the offensive game plan wasn't very good as well. The defensive game plan might have been even worse against Denver, but the offensive game plan was not very good. Comes back against Philly and plays to his player strengths, right? Gets Mike Evans involved early, gets the passes out quick, knows that you have a backup right tackle, right? Knows that your offensive line has been struggling, gets the ball out of Baker Mayfield's hands quick. Actually, the quickest time to throw that Baker Mayfield has ever had his entire career. So the game plan was good. We'll see if he can replicate something like that on the road this time on a short week, and without some weapons, right? Without Trey Palmer, without Jalen McMillan. I know Sterling Shepard stepped up, but I think it's going to have to be a big week for a guy like Chris Godwin, maybe. Mike Evans going to be going up against AJ Terrell for a good bit of this game, I think. And look, and Terrell's a good corner. Evans has gotten the better of him sometimes, but Terrell's done a decent job against him as well at times. So it'll be interesting to see that matchup, and that's why I think Godwin in the slot, which the Falcons defense has given up some yards to slot receivers. Over these first 4 games, they've given up some serious yards. So I think Godwin could be a key in this one.
Yeah, Kevin, wanted to get your 2 cents here as we kind of start to break down keys of the game for both teams here. We'll just start with the Buccaneers on offense. Baker Mayfield been playing well, really kind of come into his own as a passer here in some of these wins for Tampa Bay. I would say arguably last week against Philly, the most comfortable he's looked in the pocket despite missing his starting right tackle. So how do the Falcons approach this Buccaneers offense? Chris Godwin been probably the most productive receiver playing out of the slot for Tampa Bay. I mean, he is, a lot of times, not only is he the most productive receiver, he's Mr. Third Down, finding ways to get open. So the Bucs do have some options, but, that entails the offensive line can hold up and Baker Mayfield can stay calm in the pocket. So aside from hitting the quarterback, what are some big things that what are some big things that Atlanta is going to be circling this week?
Yeah, I mean, on the defensive side, D. Alford was tremendous for them last year as their slot corner. This year, he's not adjusted to the new scheme super well. The Falcons play almost entirely zone coverage now. Last year, they were the most man-heavy team in the NFL, and I think D. Alford is not adjusted well to that. He's been getting picked on every single week. And you wonder if this just isn't a fit for him anymore. It's sad because he's a guy that coming out of the CFL, as a UDFA, just great story. But the Falcons do have another option in veteran Antonio Hamilton, who was great for the Cardinals last year. There's not been any indication that they're planning on pulling Alford, but if something goes wrong, they do have that option available. But that's definitely where I would go if I were the Bucs. I would send Chris Godwin. Like if the Falcons are just going to let the Alford single up on Chris Godwin, I think they're going to, that's a place to attack. Alford did finish really strong last week with the pass breakup in the end zone to keep the Saints out of from winning that game essentially. So that was nice to see, but that's a weak spot. Terrell one-on-one with Mike Evans has not always gone great for Terrell, but the good news for the Falcons is they've allowed the fewest explosive passing plays of anyone in the NFL. They have arguably the best safety duo in the NFL with Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates. Those two have been critical to this defense being better, I think, in terms of what they've allowed than they actually look on the field. And it makes it really dangerous to throw deep on this team. You got Jesse Bates back there. You got Justin Simmons, who sometimes plays deep, sometimes plays over the middle in the short area, just kind of looking for opportunities to take the ball away. And teams have basically not been able to throw deep or really attempt a lot deep against this team outside of week 1 with Justin Fields just going completely unleash the dragon mode with George Pickens. And so there could be success in that same vein for the Bucs. That was the first game, obviously, with Simmons and everyone in here. So there was a lot of mistakes on the back end that have been cleaned up. But yeah, I think the slot matchup is one for sure. And then I know the Bucs haven't been great on the ground. The Falcons haven't. After losing Nate Landman at linebacker, they've been pretty vulnerable on the ground. They're rotating their defensive line a lot. I don't think they've found the right combination yet. They have so many guys in there, way too many in my opinion. Like Kentavious Street was playing nose tackle last week, which doesn't make any sense because he's small. And he's probably going to be rotated out, would be my guess. Eddie Goldman's finally playing for the Falcons. It's been 3 years. He's finally playing. He looks pretty good. So, hey, I guess better late than never there. But yeah, we're starting to wonder, like, when are we going to see the Falcons' second round pick, who they traded a day 2 pick for, in addition to taking him in the top 50. He's been inactive every single week. And Kentavious Street's been playing poorly. So, the question is, like, are we going to see Ruka Roro this week? Is he going to get an opportunity? Short week, so probably not, but I think that's coming sooner rather than later. But yeah, I mean, the Falcons, I think the Bucs, the slot matchup is the one to go after. And then the Falcons are, going to try to get pressure if they can. Last week was their best week. They had almost a 30% pressure rate against the Saints. So the interior defensive line should be their strength. It's not been so far. It's been probably the biggest disappointment on the whole team. But last week against the Saints, they started to play better. David Onyemata is finally getting healthier. Grady Jarrett's coming back. So there's a lot of moving pieces there. That interior, the Falcons desperately need them to play like they were expected to play. But, so far the Falcons pass rush has not been very good. They've just been kind of making do with decent pressure rate and great coverage on the back end. But that's going to be tough to do against a Bucs team that has a lot of weapons. Baker maybe it really comes down to, like, is this a good Baker day or a bad Baker day? Because that seems like that's how the Bucs go. Like, if Baker's on a good day, they're unstoppable. If Baker's on a bad day, it looks really bad. That's how you get that Broncos game, just kind of completely random. So the Falcons have to really pray that like Thursday night road team curse holds up. Because it's going to be a tough matchup for Atlanta, especially with Troy Anderson. It was just announced Troy Anderson is out for this game.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting matchup. And you talked about, Baker Mayfield, his day determining the success of the offense. Honestly, I think this, Denver, Vance Joseph as a defensive coordinator deserves a lot of credit, because it wasn't just Baker Mayfield getting shut down. It was everything on the field for Tampa Bay. I mean, you can find time and time again just airtight coverage on guys like Mike Evans, Chris Godwin not being able to get open. So Evan, I was going to kind of ask you a little bit. This is the last we'll touch on the Buccaneers offense before we flip the sides here. Sterling Shepard, potentially your wide receiver 3 for Tampa Bay. I think the game plan is going to be a lot of what it was last week. Maybe not throwing the ball 47 times, but getting the ball out of Baker Mayfield's hands quickly, trying to put a Band-Aid on that lack of right tackle, right? You don't notice the offensive line issues that they've had when he's able to get the ball out of his hand. He's able to play confidently as a passer. That's going to be huge, but we just talked about the very impressive defensive backfield that Atlanta does have, and I think that is going to be a factor. I think the Bucs are going to want to air it out. I just don't know if they can do it as confidently as they have been in some of these wins so far, and I think maybe a guy like Sterling Shepard could be a key on a lot of these check down intermediate routes when, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin have double team attention.
Yeah, I think, Shepard, I think also Kate Otton's another one, right?
Yeah.
Tight end over the middle there. I think, just trying to get trying to get a little bit creative, right? With getting the football in some guys' hands because you're down 2 wide receivers. So, finding other ways to get the ball in your playmakers' hands. Shepard could be one option, right? We'll see, how he looks. He had a good game last week. Hopefully he can replicate something like that. Hopefully the Buccaneers can find ways to get the ball in his hands. I do like something, about, the Falcons defense when he's talked about, I do think the Falcons secondary is probably better than Philly's, especially the safeties. I think AJ Terrell is probably, better than any corner that the Eagles have. But with a zone-heavy team like that, I do think it's an opportunity to keep getting the ball out quickly, right? And maybe, the Falcons do a good job of limiting the explosive plays. But I think it could be more of a chip away type of game, kind of, maybe not the most aesthetically pleasing type of game, right? It's going to be maybe a lot of dinking and dunking. I think the tackling of the Falcons defense is going to be a long way in determining how much success the Buccaneers had, because last week the Eagles just could not tackle. So what the Buccaneers were doing were they were getting the ball out so quick in the flats or with these screens or these little out routes, and the Bucs would break a tackle and turn a 5-yard gain into a 11-yard gain. And that's pretty much how it happens. So I think the Falcons on defense, definitely have to be on their toes tackling wise. But I do think the game plan could be similar, right? About getting the ball out quickly. But I do think they're going to want to establish the run a little bit more, right? Again, just like you said, I don't think they're going to want Baker Mayfield throwing the ball 47 times again. I don't really think that's a recipe for success every week. But the game plan called for it last week, and hey, the game plan worked to perfection. So just like Kevin said, you don't know what you're going to get sometimes, and it's true, right? When it's a good Baker Mayfield day, there's not much that can stop this offense, right? There really isn't. I mean, self-inflicted wounds, obviously penalties can be an issue, which they've done a decent job of not having many penalties this year so far. But yeah, if Baker Mayfield's good, it's going to be tough to stop. I think it's going to be tough to stop Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, even being down 2 wide receivers. I think it's going to be tough to stop. If Baker Mayfield's bad, the Buccaneers are going to have other ways to overcome that. So hopefully it is the former and not the latter. But we will see come Thursday night. Rhett, you're muted.
Thank you. Beauty of doing it live. We haven't brought any attention to it so far this season, which I guess is a good thing in the grand scheme of things. But the discipline of this Buccaneers football team, there haven't been as many back-breaking penalties. I mean, yeah, you get them every now and again.
Knock on wood.
They suck. But I think when you look around at some of these other teams, like Kevin, I would argue for the Falcons, discipline has kind of been a thing here so far in the early going.
Yeah. I mean, it's been disappointing to see, last week in particular, those, new center Ryan Newsel comes in, 2 snap infractions, in one of them on a 4th and 1, the other one on a critical drive, kills both drives. And that's just the stuff you can't have when this offense is already not firing on all cylinders. Yeah, I mean, the discipline is obviously a big thing. So they're going to be working on that. I know in the past it's been an issue for the Bucs. Seems like this year things are going better, so that's great. It's, I'm really interested to see how this one plays out. The Eagles to me are just like on the Eagles, like just the weirdest team in the NFL. Like that defensive line has so much talent, and they go from like doing absolutely nothing to just completely shredding, like on a week-to-week basis. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. But that defense has to be like the biggest enigma in the NFL right now. It's like you see all that talent. It's like
you want to talk about not knowing what you're gonna get from Baker Mayfield. You don't know what you're gonna get from the Eagles on a week-to-week basis. So
it's completely bizarre. It's like completely shreds the Saints, who have been, who basically before that were just a buzzsaw, and then gives up like it was like 20 first quarter points or something.
Yeah,
it's just like, okay, sure, whatever. Strange team, man. Strange team.
It's a fun matchup for both of these teams. And, we talk about the offense and the defense. Before we take a look here at the Falcons offense, I think the trenches are going to go such a long way in this game. I think for both teams, things can open up or ultimately be hindered by the trenches in this game. The lack of reinforcements we already talked about. Both teams down a couple of offensive linemen, starting offensive linemen, the Bucs without right tackle Luke Gedeke. So, I think this could be the week for Tampa Bay if the coverage is good, if Baker is having a bad Baker day. I want to cross my fingers and say that this is the week Bucs fans have been waiting for them to unleash a Bucky Irving, to kind of dictate the pace of the game. But I think the physicality of the offensive line for Tampa Bay is going to be huge. And if they can play consistent, protect their quarterback, or just open up some run lanes, I think this could be the game for the Bucs run game to really get going here. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I got all my notes in order in my head. We are going to flip to the other side of the football here, Kevin, and wanted to get your thoughts on this Atlanta Falcons offense. I bring up the trenches because for the Bucs, we talked a little before the show, but the depth along this defensive line is kind of the biggest question mark week to week. I would say the state of the pass rush is something that a lot of people are going to be watching because it was a lackluster first 3 weeks of the season. Then you get Vita Vea back and you get 6 sacks. So you're right back up in the mix as far as NFL rankings, but you would like to see more consistent production. And I think slowing down any quarterback in the NFL is going to start with applying pressure from 4 down linemen. We know Todd Bowles loves to get creative with a defensive front, and he's going to send a lot of different kind of players at the quarterback, whether it's a defensive back, whether it's a linebacker, whether it's Vita Vea as a stand-up rusher. You never really know what you're going to see. So Atlanta, that offensive line certainly going to have their hands full this week, but they've got the weapons, and I think if Kirk Cousins brings his A-game, this will definitely be a competitive game down the stretch here.
Yeah. I mean, really for the Falcons, it's just like, the offense, if they can actually execute on time, that one nice thing is like Zach Robinson, I know he's drawn ire so far. I think it's partially misplaced because I think some of the issues have been Kirk and some of the issues have been changing 2 offensive linemen in the span of 5 snaps against, the against the Chiefs. That obviously is going to throw a wrench into things. And Kyle Pitts doesn't have a role on this team right now. Like they're basically throwing him, this is a hot topic. I know you guys if you guys have been paying attention to any Falcons Twitter or even like nationally at this point, like Pitts is just a wide tight end for this team at this stage. Like it's kind of an interesting decision. That they're not really doing anything to give him. I mean, we've seen Jimmy Graham, they could just do that, but no, we're not going to do that. But they have actually gotten, I think part of the thing is they've gotten really good play from Darnell Mooney, who has emerged for them as like a legitimate option. He's been tremendous deep. He's shown off yards after the catch. He's arguably been Cousins' favorite target. And then Ray McLeod in the slot has been effective. And they seem to like that matchup, and Cousins seems to trust McLeod a lot more than Kyle Pitts. So, I guess that's where we are. The run game has been really inconsistent for Atlanta. That's been the big problem. Obviously, losing those 2 linemen early in week 3 has contributed a lot to that. The Falcons really put it on Philadelphia in the run game, and they were doing well against the Saints, particularly late. They just didn't really keep it up. So I think for this Falcons team, they'll have to find a way to run the ball. I think that's always going to be a part of what this team wants to do, but it's also, can Cousins kind of calm down, read the field, and pick the right target? Because his issue has been, like last week in particular, he just kept going deep, like over and over. And I get that you like the matchup. I get that your guy's open, but he's not hitting the deep throws with consistency. And you go back to the final drive of that Saints game, Falcons get a DPI that puts them at the 40. It's like, okay, we need to get 5 to 10 yards to make this an easy field goal. 3 straight deep shots from Kirk Cousins. The last one, if it had been caught, could have ended the game, because if Darnell Mooney doesn't get out of bounds, even if he gets down to the 5, like, you're not spiking that ball before the clock runs out. So again, it's just really like you expect more from your veteran quarterback. You go back and watch some of those plays. It's like Bijan Robinson wide open underneath, 20 yards of empty space with blockers in front. You just take that dump off. He runs out of bounds. Who's kicking a 40-yarder? No, you got to make Koo kick a 58-yarder to win the game, which he did. So props to Koo, obviously, for that. But yeah, just the offense as a whole, like, this offense has the potential to be really good. They have, when their offensive line is healthy, one of the best offensive lines. Matthew Bergeron's taken a step forward. You know, they're who was a left guard rookie last year. Chris Lindstrom's still really good. The receivers, I think, are a lot better than people thought. The running backs are both really good. You know, you've got all the pieces here. It just hasn't come together yet. And I know with the Bucs defense, like Zion McCollum has been the biggest surprise of the year on defense for a lot of people. I think that he's been playing excellent. So that's a huge boost. You know, Jamel Dean still playing well. I know Tyke Smith has been a little up and down as a rookie, but you know, that's probably what you'd expect. It just seems like the linebacker's really thin now. It looks like for the Bucs, and the defensive line is questionable. Nice to get Villa back, obviously, but a lot of depth that's hurt. And even the guys that are in there, a lot of them are banged up. So you wonder how many snaps can they realistically take?
Yeah, I think
it's sorry, Rhett. It's definitely something where I think, look, heading into this season, right? We looked at, I think, the pass rush, mostly the pass rush, because look, like the run defense, as long as Vita Vea is in there, I never think the Bucs run defense is going to be bad, right? Like I just don't think he's just too good of a run defender for them to be bad. Even a lot of their edge rushers are decent run defenders, but the pass rush, right? Rushing the passer was going to be a concern, and so far, I mean, it has been. Look, like one game against Philly getting 6 sacks is not going to completely flip my opinion on this Bucs pass rush. They need to do a lot more for a long period of time for me to become confident in their ability to consistently put pressure on the quarterback, because through the first 3 games, they did not do that. So I have to take that more of a sample size than just one game. Particularly also, a lot of their sacks were late. I think they had 3 sacks in the fourth quarter, so half of their sacks were late in the game. But I mean, the return of Vita Vea is welcome. Zion McCollum has been, you could argue that Zion McCollum has been the Bucs actually best defensive player, like most consistent defensive player this season. And this is a defense that has guys like Levante David, Vita Vea, and I know Winfield's only played 1 game, but McCollum has been a rock star for the Bucs. And Jamel Dean, to me, has been a bit disappointing. Not necessarily that he's been terrible. It's just they wanted him to be the cornerback 1, and it seems like it's almost flipped, right? It seems like Zion McCollum is becoming this team's cornerback 1. Jamel Dean may have to result into like a cornerback 2, and that's going to be an interesting matchup. Because I think if you're the Falcons, I would look Dean's way before I look McCollum's way right now. I would not be just consistently targeting Zion McCollum. Jamel Dean, definitely somebody to keep an eye on.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say and what I wanted to get your opinion on, because you know, the limitations of this Buccaneers secondary can only go so far as what their best secondary player is playing, right? Zion McCollum has been a godsend. He has put so many good things on film. He has been a great coverage cornerback. He's really good at, you know, playing man coverage, just getting in tight, getting a hand on the football, disrupting the play. He's been great. One of the highest graded corners in the NFL, no matter where you look, really. Jamel Dean, the disappointment with him, I think, is just like Evan said, the Bucs have been wanting a number 1 corner in him after they decided to move on from Carlton Davis. You know, they kind of made up their mind that Jamel Dean is going to be the guy. They paid him, gave him the contract. And I would argue there's a couple of reps. It looks like he may just not want to be out there. So for Atlanta, Evan, again, it's important you brought this up because we can talk all day about the trenches and the pass rush, but you know, Jamel Dean is a guy who is still prone to giving up that big play, right? A couple of guys this year have already thrown the ball up over his head. I think it happened in Detroit. He gave up a big play over the top, and I think Jalen Hurts got him as well one time. So, you know, if the Falcons get Kirko in the pocket, who likes his matchup deep and wants to throw the ball deep 4 straight times, if he hits on one of those and it happens in the first quarter, it could potentially get out of hand with, you know, a confident Kirk Cousins and maybe a dilapidated Bucs defense. I don't think it happens that way. I hope it doesn't happen that way. I think it would be irresponsible football for Kirko to come out in the first quarter, but maybe if he's feeling confident, you know, maybe if he's feeling confident by the third, he can start taking some chances in the pocket. But I think it's going to have to be a really lockdown day for Zion McCollum, especially. I think Jamel Dean could potentially be picked on here if he gives up 1 or 2 plays, but Zion McCollum has been great. He's going to have to continue to be great, Evan.
Yeah, he is. And, you know, it's going to have, if he's going to be, you know, the quarterback 1, he's going to be going up against Drake London a lot of the game. And London, you know, is a good wide receiver. I mean, he is a talented wide receiver. Look, I mean, you know, we can sing, you know, McCollum's praises, but fact of the matter is, Washington, their number 2 wide receiver was, I Bleav, Zacchaeus. Philly, their number 2 wide receiver was John Dotson, maybe Paris Gamble.
Right,
they were banged up. So look, I mean, 2 out of the 4 games, right? He hasn't gone up against some really, really good talent. And this time around, Darnell Mooney's been really good. And Drake London has a nice resume. Drake London has had some big games against the Buccaneers in the past as well. So that's something where they're going to have to keep an eye on that. And hopefully, again, it comes back to the trenches, though. You can make this a lot easier on your secondary if you're able to pressure Kirk Cousins consistently, make him get the ball out quicker than he wants to, or just, sack him, force him into a 3rd and longs, and that puts your secondary at even more of an advantage. So I think it'll definitely be interesting to see, but I think it's going to come down to what type of trench play do the Buccaneers bring to the table this week.
Yeah, you don't need to get 6 sacks from this defensive front to win. I'd argue you don't even need to get 4, but meaningful pressure that can, potentially cause something to happen, whether it's a miscommunication between the quarterback and a wide receiver, mistiming the ball and, throwing an incompletion, or, best case scenario, meaningful pressure forces a turnover, which we have seen happen. So let's wrap things up with our score predictions here. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I get a very weird feeling about this game. And I don't think the Bucs are going to lose, but I think as much as this team has exceeded expectations for me these last 2 seasons, I mean, even in the first 4 weeks of the year, sitting at 3-1 right now is exceeding my expectations. Last year, they were 3-5, played really well down the stretch to ultimately make it to the postseason, exceeded my expectations. Played, granted, a beat-up Philly team, but came out hot, looked prepared in the postseason, and competed with Detroit. Exceeded my expectations. So I need them to exceed my expectations again here, because it seems like these last couple of years, regardless of how well things have gone for Tampa Bay, Evan, whenever they reach a game like this, whenever they have a game that will put them in a perfect situation, it seems like they have the ability to kind of fumble the bag a little bit. And I'm praying that doesn't happen. I'm praying that Todd Bowles has these guys ready to play. But regardless, I think they win. I will say a close game, because it just feels like it's going to be a close game. NFC South, division opponent, first time you've seen them this year. And again, some of those coaching staff connections we talked about, I think it'll be close. I think the Bucs win an ugly one here, 24-21. Like you said, not as aesthetically pleasing as some of these earlier games the Bucs have played. I don't think the offense will be nearly as high-flying as it was against Washington week 1. But a hard-fought win, and I think the best team will win here. 24-21 Bucs on top. Evan, your pick here.
I'm a lot more confident than you are.
Surprising.
Look, I mean, I don't want to, the Falcons are not, this is going to be a close game, divisional game, right? And I Bleav in my season predictions, I had the Buccaneers splitting with the Falcons. I forget which game I had the Buccaneers winning and losing. I do forget. Last year, obviously, the Bucs split with the Falcons. The Buccaneers, since 2019, are 4-1 against Atlanta in Atlanta. And that one loss was the last game of the regular season 2022, when the Buccaneers pulled their starters. That was a game they had the lead at halftime in. So the Buccaneers have had a lot of success lately in Atlanta. This is a Falcons team that needed a special team, a block punt return for a touchdown, a pick 6 last week, did not score an offensive touchdown, and they need a 58-yard field goal along with a defensive pass interference call to win the game by 2 points. And look, they play the Chiefs tough, right? They did. And again, I'm saying I don't think this game is going to be just so simple. I just think the Buccaneers are just the better team. And I think they're going to see an opportunity here to take a hold of the NFC South, right? That really, I mean, a lot of football left, just because if they would win this game, the division's not wrapped up. But I think they're going to see an opportunity here. And this is a game where it starts a tough stretch, right? You're at Atlanta, at New Orleans, but then you got Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, San Francisco. I mean, it's a tough stretch for the Buccaneers, and I think they know the importance of this game. So I think they're going to come out on a short week and play well. And I have a very similar score prediction to you. I have the Buccaneers winning 24-20 over the Falcons. So Again, close game. I think, this probably means that I'm probably going to predict the Bucs to lose in Tampa in a couple of weeks if the Buccaneers win this game. I don't see either team sweeping this year, but I just, for this matchup, I am pretty confident in the Buccaneers. And like I said, I think they're catching Kirk Cousins at the right time. I think, the lack of mobility has been a little eye-opening to me, I guess, where, especially earlier in the season. I know he's gotten better, but I think it's something the Bucs can take advantage of. So I do have the Buccaneers winning this game and improving to 4-1.
Kevin, what you got?
Yeah, my score prediction is very similar. I think I had the Falcons winning this like 24-23. I do think that this is a game where the Falcons offense will actually wake up a little bit. Looking at historical stuff with Kirk Cousins, October is when he typically turns it on. And I do think the Buccaneers defense with the injuries is vulnerable. I don't think the Falcons defense is shutting down or keeping the Bucs offense down. So I think this could end up being even higher scoring. I think this could be, like, if Good Baker shows up, it's going to be a shootout for sure. But I do have confidence in the Falcons. Like last year, I would have said no chance because you got Zion McCollum who's going to cover London and the Falcons aren't going to throw to anyone else. So, there's not really any other options. Now with Mooney and McLeod having success, they do have some other options to do that. And yeah, I do think that Atlanta squeaks this one out at home. I think that the Thursday night road game is very unkind to the traveler. So that plays a part as well. But I think it's going to be a sweaty one, unfortunately, for everyone involved. Just hopefully no more injuries because it's you guys have had enough. Like that's enough for the whole season, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked so much about the Buccaneers getting to this stretch of the season and having, a good amount of wins under their belt, but I just want them to get to the bye week in one piece. I mean, you've lost so many stars now for an extended period of time, and I'm glad they're playing well. I'm glad that this next man up mentality is really starting to show. I think Todd Bowles has a good mentality in his guys. When they show up ready to play, when you get weeks like Denver, it's hard to not be disappointed. But I think the Bucs will show up ready to play. But yeah, definitely want to come out of this one healthier than they are now, for sure. Some score predictions here from the live chat audience. Mikey Kelly, 38-35 Bucs. Realtor Dave Zussman says, we cannot do that Todd Bowles thing of keeping the CB 7 feet away from the wide receivers. I was actually going to bring that up. We need to bring the pressure in the front, but keep tight coverage in the secondary. That will lead us to get interceptions and sacks. Clack 5 White says 24-17 Bucs. Realtor Dave Zussman says Bucs 38, Falcons 13. BK Jackson says 30-17 Bucs. And Eddie Nash with a close one here, 31-24 Bucs. Ladies and gentlemen, that's just about going to do it for this week's game preview edition of the Cannon Fire podcast. We will talk to you guys live Thursday night following the game. It's going to be a late one, so stock up on your energy drinks, nicotine, whatever else you need to get you through the night. We're going to be with you here live, youtube.com/Cannon Fire podcast. Win, lose, or draw, we will be live. And the autograph fan line will be on as well, taking your calls. Want to say thank you to our good friend Kevin Knight from the Falcoholic for joining us today. Kevin, always appreciate your insight. You seem like, one of the more level-headed Falcons fans. And we can always appreciate that because I feel like the more level-headed you are, the more information you open yourself up to. And we really appreciate your knowledge today.
Absolutely. No, always fun to talk about these two teams. And I've been scarred by this team a lot. I know you guys have plenty of scars from the Bucs. So, at that point, it becomes a little bit easier to be objective, at this point with these two teams. But this is a critical game. Big deal for both these teams. And it's super early too. So it's just it's going to be interesting to see because, like you said, the Bucs about to go into arguably their hardest stretch. The Falcons kind of coming out of theirs. So whoever wins this game is feeling really good. Whoever loses is probably okay, but not happy. So it's an interesting spot. The schedule makers gave us an exciting Thursday night football game here.
Trauma bonding, I think, is the term they have for it. Where can the people find you and your content?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Falcoholic Kevin. You can find my podcast, Dirty Birds and Brews, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. And then on YouTube, it's at the Falcoholic Live or just the Falcoholic YouTube channel on YouTube if you want to watch the video.
Awesome, Kevin. Thank you again. We'll talk to you soon. Follow our show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at EvanNFL and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. Sorry, mine's going a million miles an hour. It's a short week. Evan, you and I both have kind of been busting ass this week.
Yeah, a lot of content, not only on Bucs Nation, but also on the Cannon Fire Podcast YouTube channel. So Betting the Bucs is out now. Go check that out. Following a good week against the Eagles, we're seeing if we can continue the good times here. Then also Players to Watch was just released this morning. So all the content you guys need before the game is here. We got the game preview right now for you, but we also have a tons of extra content as well. So also be sure to stay tuned. Friday at some point will be the most impressive from Thursday's game, and then we'll probably take the weekend off. But stay tuned for that, and stay tuned for more Bucs content on the YouTube channel. So if you're listening on audio, we appreciate you, but if you want a little bit more content, head over to the Cannon Fire Podcast YouTube channel.
Absolutely. Last but not least, you can find myself Instagram and Twitter at Rhettakus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. But once again, that's the show. Thank you again to our guest, Kevin Knight, for joining us from the Falcoholic. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off for my co-host, Evan Wanish. We will talk to you in the next one. Until then, and as always, thank you for listening, and go Bucs.